Flow Wisdom presents Becoming by Michelle Obama. Book summary.
Becoming. Michelle Obama was not always an American attorney, a working mother, or the First Lady. She was Michelle Robinson in the 1970s, a teenager on Chicago's southern side who loved Stevie Wonder and jazz music and also wanted to get good grades in school. Becoming is the story of how Michelle Obama excelled at class and met an up-and-coming lawyer named Barack Obama, who would become her partner in an incredible life. Realizing that she really wanted to help people beyond the intricacies of contract law, Michelle left her job in a prestigious law firm to work in the field of nonprofit, community outreach, and mentoring. Michelle Robinson had a loving family. Her great-aunt taught her how to play the piano. Chicago hosted the Democratic National Convention in 1968, which sparked a violent clash between the police and the demonstrators of the Vietnam War. The parents of Michelle Robinson lived just 9 miles from the southern coast of Chicago's Congress City. Since she was just 4 at the time, though, she was slow to the tumultuous politics of the day and much more interested in playing with her dolls. Michelle grew up in a loving family with a 2-year-old brother, a father working at the water filtration facility, and a mother who was a sewing needle whiz and very involved in community outreach and groups, such as her local parent-teacher group. Her dad always loved jazz and painting, and many of the earliest memories of Michelle revolve around the music that always surrounded her. The grand-aunt and uncle of her grandmother lived on the first floor on the second floor of a 4-story house. Her grand-aunt, Robbie, was a piano teacher, so another musical element of his childhood was the sound of scales and songs stolen from her pupils. Therefore, at the age of 4, Michelle began attending classes with Robbie. Robbie might have been a daunting and intimidating task leader, and 2 of them bumped off during his lessons, and as a child, Michelle had already had strong ideas. Nevertheless, Robbie saved the day that Michelle was going to perform his album at the Roosevelt University Concert Hall at the first grand piano recital. The piano of Robbie had a middle C key chipped. The middle C is used to help a player put their hands on the piano, making it easier for Michelle to see it with this little chipped corner on Robbie's piano. Young Michelle knew her song back and forth on the stage at Roosevelt University, but she was completely stuck, unable to find the middle C. Fortunately, Robbie sat in the front row and knew what to do. While she walked confidently onto the stage, she reached as a guardian angel over her shoulder and pointed to the middle C. As Chicago's South Side changed, Michelle tried to be a good student and felt she was good enough. The South Side of Chicago has been changed over the years. The town was 96% white in 1950. In 1981, it was black at 96%. Michelle was born in the middle of this transition, so when she started school, there was a mix of different families, both black and white. But as she grew older, more and more black and white families decided to move to the suburbs if they had the means to take their money with them in the process. As a result, the neighborhood's businesses and schools began to suffer before real estate developers finally began branding the South Side of Chicago as a ghetto. At Princeton, Michelle entered a whole different world and found a great mentor called Cherny Bradual. Michelle had a weekly meeting with her college therapist as a student at Whitney M. Young High. She was serving as a school counselor at that time, entered the National Honor Society, and was on her way to becoming 10% of her class. Nevertheless, she was told, "I'm not sure you're Princeton material." A year ago, a great basketball player, Michelle's brother, Craig, entered Princeton University and thought you might join him. But there was a professional counselor who was basically telling him to through his goals and worry a little less. Luckily, this encounter did not lose the confidence of Michelle and instead only served to confuse him, so he proceeded and went to Princeton. Of course, Michelle was welcomed and reunited with her brother on the pristine New Jersey campus of the college. She couldn't help but remember on her first date there how different Princeton was. First of all, Michelle knew what it was like to be one of the people who wasn't white for the first time. It was surprising as well as painful. Less than 9% of students were black in the first-class year of Michelle. Nevertheless, Michelle found a hospitable family in the school, and not only that, she found a great mentor. Although Princeton was predominantly white, there was also a third world center, TZ, renamed Carl A. Fields Center for Diversity and Cultural Understanding. TC was there to encourage vibrant students, and Shirney Braswell, an enthusiastic, free New Yorker, was one of its founders. Michelle immediately turned to Braswell, a powerful black woman and working mother. Michelle became Shirney's assistant and activist during her years at Princeton, acquiring a series of new life experiences in the process. Shirney recommended that new writers read it, prompted Michelle to ask important questions, and even guided a post-school program for black faculty and staff members. Michelle studied sociology at Princeton and started to think about Harvard Law School for her next move, but she also learned a lot about life from Shirney. Michelle knew that one day she wanted to be a working mother, and as a single working mother, Shirney couldn't be a better example of how Grace and Panish could do this. After the law school, Michelle met Barack Obama, and eventually they fell in love. Throughout his life, Michelle was on a very strict road. Everything was perfected in her environment and doing what the successful people needed to do. This led Michelle to take the LSAT exam and to go to Harvard Law School from Princeton, and never to leave the track and leave for a moment, asking her what he wanted to do. In 1988, after Harvard, Michelle returned to Chicago, where she joined the esteemed Sidley and Austin. Unlike Michelle, Barack took a few years of his bachelor's degree in Columbia to try his hand at various jobs before returning to school at Harvard Law. He was self-confident and self-assured, one of the reasons he left such an impression on everyone he met. So before she met Barack, Michelle had heard people talk about this stunning young man. His professors at Harvard told him the most gifted student he had ever worked for. But Michelle remained questionable. In her previous experience, she'd seen white professors go bonkers over any half-smart black man in a nice suit. Michelle's part of the job at Sidley and Austin, promising to meet with law students, was probably trying to join the company and as a graduate advise them when they are available. But meeting Barack was different from the other students she really met. Since he'd taken those years off before Harvard Law, he was a few years older than her, and there didn't seem to be much advice to give him. In fact, everyone in the firm was eager to get his opinion on whatever they were working on. However, they had a lot in common. They knew the South Side neighborhoods in Chicago, where they worked as a community organizer and behaved very similar to an easy relationship that developed rapidly between the two. But even though he was a tall, attractive man with a nice smile and a sexy voice, Michelle didn't immediately think they were a romantic match, because he was smoking. However, after proving that she was too cerebral to find out about her friends, she missed her cigarette and accepted her request on a date. And after their first kiss, there was no doubt about your future husband. Michelle and Barack got married in 1991 and started to engage in new works. It didn't take very long for the relationship between Michelle and Barack to get serious. And since she held her brother's opinion in high regard, she was happy to hear that Craig liked Barack and found him to be a pretty decent basketball player, which was a big plus in Craig's estimation. Unfortunately, they had to spend some time with Barack ending at Harvard, where he was the first black editor of the school's prestigious blog, the Harvard Law Review. In 1991, Barack joined Michelle in Chicago, and the two took the joy of living together. Many jobs were offered to Barack, but, as with everything else, he was more than concerned with helping a friend build a community workshop more than taking a high-paying concert at a law firm. Meanwhile, Michelle was thinking a big change in her own career, which was very painful because she devoted a lot of time and lessons to take her to Sidley and Austin. But what he really wanted to do was not to spill contracts on behalf of companies, to help people face to face. Fortunately, 1991, Michelle also was a year in which the next step to take to help our community and become a lifelong friend of the other influential people who met with Valerie Jarrett in his career. Like Michelle, Valerie was an unsatisfied lawyer who had left a high-wage job for calling for help. Valerie's inspiration was Harold Washington, the hero of the black community. Tragically died from a heart attack while sitting at the desk until, as had been the boss of the Chicago mayor-governor. Valerie decided to continue working for the mayor, and eventually Richard Daley, Michelle's current mayor, helped him find work as Junior's assistant. In October 1992, Michelle and Barack got married, but the honeymoon did not last long because the Barack Project was recruited to help the game. Attempt: Black society, more people to register to vote in November elections that year for the use intended designed as. Barack worked tirelessly, registering only 7,000 people in a week. Subsequently, in 1993, Michelle was engaged in another initiative called Public Allies. After working several years in City Hall, promising that connects youth with mentors working in the public sector, he has accepted the organization's executive director, expanding the nonprofit mission. Thankfully, it attracted a generation of talented individuals to the public sector. It was a job that really resonated with Michelle when she was so impressed by her mentor her life. After writing his first book, Barack was given a political opportunity. However, Michelle did not want this to happen. Michelle had seen her husband's gift for communication in a church basement as he spoke to a small audience of mostly women who were concerned about their community. He begged them to use the power of political engagement, to vote, and to reach out to the mayor's office or their local representative. By the end of the speech, the women were shouting, "Amen," and Michelle was won over as well. It was obvious he had a gift of being able to reach people and inspire hope in them. After the Project VOT campaign, Chicago Magazine had also noticed Barack's effectiveness. In an article, they suggested that this young fellow should run for office elections. Barack shrugged it off at the time, as he had his own plan to write a book entitled Dreams from My Father. The book was important for Barack because it was a way of adapting to an unusual life story. His mother, a white woman, was with a family from Kansas who had married a Kenyan whose father had already married his mother when he had another wife in Kenya. It didn't take long before her parents married. Finally, her mother met someone else, an Indonesian, a 60-year-old Barack, and her mother moved there to live for a while. Much of Barack's life spilled across Indonesia and Hawaii, where his mother's family moved. He also remained close to his relatives in Kenya, even after his father's death in 1982. Barack took Michelle to see his grandmother Sarah, who lives in a village outside Nairobi. Dreams from My Father was published in 1995. It had decent reviews but did not sell much. By then, Barack was teaching a class on racism and law at the University of Chicago, and it was that same year when Barack was approached about entering politics. In the Illinois State Senate, he was about to open a seat, one representing the Hyde Park district where Barack and Michelle lived. However, Michelle was not excited about Barack's entry into politics. According to him, since Barack was in some stuffy office in the state of Senate, he had more influence as head of a nonprofit organization. But Barack believed he had a chance to do really good things, and Michelle wasn't about to outrun Barack's ambitions. As their families grew, Barack's political career led to his first experience of how his personal life will be. Although Michelle and Barack have similar sensibilities, there are differences. For example, Barack's favorite films are dark and serious, and Michelle prefers a good rom-com. And then there are ways to deal with personal attacks that have a career in politics. Barack has an incredible ability to throw punches, while Michelle, with her self-described need to be like, is less able to brush off someone's hurtful comment. One of the first political attacks that really affected Michelle was in the middle of the party's primary campaign against other Democrats, Bobby Rush and Don Trotter, to run for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. By this point, the family had grown to include their first daughter, Malia Ann Obama, who was born on the 4th of July, 1998. She was especially precious to them since it had been such a hassle for Michelle to get pregnant, with the couple having to use in vitro fertilization. Therefore, In 1999, when the family visiting their relatives on vacation were in Hawaii, Malia had a serious ear infection. Conducting it was very scary. But to make matters more difficult, the Illinois Senate announced the urgent vote on a large arms check bill. It became the center of much debate. But Malia, he couldn't fly in his terms, so Barack did what he thought was right, the first to put the family away, even when he came to a project he struggled hard for. So it was particularly terrifying when Malia got a serious ear infection while the family was in Hawaii, visiting relatives during the holiday break of 1999. But to make matters more difficult, the Illinois Senate announced an emergency vote on a big gun control bill that had been the center of much debate. But Malia couldn't fly in her condition, so Barack did what he felt was right, which was putting family first, even when it came to a bill that he'd fought hard to pass. Barack lost the first, but continued to serve in the state of the Senate. And then, in June 2001, the second daughter of the family, Natasha Marion Obama, came, more known as Sasha. Michelle was suspicious of politics. However, her attitude changed during Barack's presidential campaign. Michelle was not very content as Barack was missing a lot of family dinners thanks to his job as a state senator, so she wasn't too excited about the prospect of him running for the U.S. Senate. One of the reasons she gave him the go-ahead was because she secretly doubted he would win. He lost a Congress principal a long time ago. And Michelle creating a difference and give up politics if he loses a promise to find another way. But in an ironic transformation of fate, the Republican rival is out of the race. And then, presidential candidate John Kerry of the 2004 Democratic National Convention asked Barack to make an opening statement when he came to use teleprompters, a surprisingly risky move for almost all Americans outside of Illinois and almost unknown to a beginner, to be on television. Therefore, it would be impossible to say that 2004 was a lucky year for Barack, but he felt that a cosmic destiny was at hand that year. The truth is that Barack was preparing for his DNC speech for most of his life, and that's why this conversation is so powerful. Yes, he memorized it, but he was speaking from his heart. Michelle's hearing was not a surprising conversation, because she already knew how amazing her husband was. But now the rest of the nation knew and created a sensation overnight. As the prominent NBC commentator Chris Matthews said, "BC, I only saw the first black president, Chris," as he heard the speech. Of course, Barack began to become a presidential candidate in the next election, and there was a change in Michelle's heart. When Barack announced his candidacy, he was amazed to see the 15,000 people in a bitterly cold news event in Michelle, Illinois, as if Obamas were a rock band or something. Suddenly, she realized that they owed these people the best they could. Now, Michelle felt the responsibility of showing the Americans who called her husband as a beacon of hope. Now, he would have to play a big role in sharing his message and telling his story. As the First Lady, Michelle tried to give her children a normal childhood. During the campaign, Barack Obama received a Secret Service security detail earlier than any candidate in history because of serious threats to him. However, the life in the White House had another level of protection and was not always appreciated by Michelle, although he understood that the protocols and measures should keep his family safe. When Barack won the elections, he seemed to be being thrown into an alternative universe where the simplest things could require dozens of people's efforts. Michelle and Barack had lost their privacy and autonomy, but Michelle was determined to do the normal thing for her children. Of course, it was easier than telling. They found a nice school. Chelsea Clinton's Sidwell Friends School is a famous Quaker educational institution. In fact, Hillary Clinton was polite enough to pass on Michelle some of the wisdom she'd received as the First Lady for 8 years, shortly after the move to Obama's. Of course, this didn't help a lot because it didn't have a guidebook to be the First Lady, and it certainly wasn't one either, because the White House would be a responsible mother of 2 teenage girls while living in the bubble in the 132 chamber. Out of the first things Michelle did was to make sure that Sasha and Malia comprehended that, despite its unusual environment and regal trappings, the White House was their home. Therefore, It was not unusual for them to play around in the hallways and rummage for snacks in the pantry. Michelle also made it a priority to find a reliable system to allow her friends to visit. One of the realities of life at the White House was that all visitors had to get Social Security numbers by the authorities before they entered. Therefore, if Obama's children were friends, it was impossible for girls to spontaneously go to a local ice cream shop. All the rules and restrictions of the White House can make it strange for children living there. However, at the beginning of their stay, Michelle, Sasha, and Malia, they took a large tray from the kitchen and used it for slipping on a snow-covered hillside on South Summit was a relief to see. Michelle tried to find her own voice with projects like Let's Move initiative as well. One of the great things about living in the White House was that Barack no longer had to go a long day. The Oval Office was literally below where they lived. For this reason, becoming president meant that Barack would be ready for dinner more than his time as a state and U.S. senator. As for Michelle's role as First Lady, she was determined to use her position to a great extent and to do something to talk about who she is and what she believes in. Hillary Clinton talked about the potential dangers of too much involvement in government. Agenda. He has been criticized for wanting to use his experience as a lawyer to help determine healthcare experience and other policies. According to his experience, the people believed that the First Lady should not act as an elected official. For this reason, Michelle, while conducting her own policies, paid attention to initiate initiatives that could complement the policies of the administration. One of Michelle's first efforts was to start a garden in the White House. This was another way to make the White House feel more like a house than a castle. But it was also about avoiding processed foods in favor of healthy eating and fresh foods. It was the heart of Michelle's Let's Move. A 3-year-old boy who has tripled over the past 30 years and is a serious condition that causes one to become obese or overweight. Initiative. Michelle and her team worked hard at Let's Move, containing 4 major steps platform. The first was to inform parents about healthy eating options. The second was to make food in schools healthier. The third was to find ways to bring healthy food to many rural and urban areas without fresh fruits and production. The fourth was to make the children more active. As in the garden, Let's Go, successful from the very beginning proved to be. 10 weeks later, the first harvest of the garden immediately produced 90 kilos of products in the White House. And Let's Move. After the release of flour, school lunch suppliers promised to reduce salt and sugar. The American Beverage Association decided to create clearer content labels, and large television stations agreed to publish public service announcements in children's programs. There were hardships and struggles along the way, but Michelle Obama takes pride in what she has done at the White House. The second period, when Barack began as president, the family had adapted to the protocols of the White House. For example, Barack and Michelle learned that during the first term, they would no longer be able to make an appointment. They couldn't play dinner and Broadway play in a nice restaurant. He put a lot of negative pressure on him, brought the presidential car's traffic to a standstill, and people in the restaurant and theater had to be safely checked in after they arrived, which made Michelle feel very bad about himself. But if she was angry with them for wanting to spend the night, Michelle got angry because she was telling stories that lie about the birthplace of the press and helped spread ugly rumors by imitating her birth certificate and the cuttings of related Hawaii newspapers. These claims were not only offensive, they also confused a dangerous element in Barack's threatening population. These rumors were in existence since the first presidential campaign, but they reappeared in the winter of 2011. A few weeks later, an armed man opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle at the White House's settlement. Several months before repairs were made, there was a huge pit in Michelle's bulletproof window in the room where she often sat down to read. He reminded us why all protocols and security procedures exist. When we look back, Michelle is proud of what she was able to accomplish through this. At the start, she still had that nagging voice that wondered if she was really good enough. But once again, she could gain the confidence to say, "Yes, I am. Come along with Move." 45 million children brought healthy school lunches and associated school programs, enrolled 11 million children in the program. Also helped 1.5 million veterans and their spouses did not attempt to cooperate to get their jobs. In the meantime, the Initiative for Girls Learning Initiative has earned billions of dollars to enable girls across the globe to gain access to schools as well as their empowerment. But Michelle is really proud that she and her husband were able to raise two amazing daughters. Malia graduated from Sidwell Friends School during their last year in the White House, and the family stayed in Washington after Barack's presidency ended so that Sasha could also graduate alongside the friends she made over the past 8 years. By the way, Michelle still hates politics and doesn't have any intention to go into any office.
This was released from For the Sake of Education by Flow Wisdom. If the content was helpful, make sure to subscribe.